The first time I watched my wife take another man into our bedroom, I was sitting inside an ambulance station, trying not to become the kind of man I had spent 11 years watching get taken away in handcuffs at the scenes I responded to. My name is Garrett Cole. I'm 35 years old, a paramedic with the Seattle Fire Department, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I believed I was a reasonably good husband. Not perfect, not always present, but steady, dependable, the kind of man who shows up at work, at home, and everywhere in between. Tessa was 33. She taught yoga at an upscale wellness studio near Bellevue, and she was genuinely good at it. Her classes filled up weeks in advance. People drove across the city to take her sessions. I was proud of that. I paid the mortgage and most of our household expenses because my salary was stable and predictable. Tessa reinvested most of her earnings into her brand, retreat weekends, certification courses, new equipment for the studio. Supporting her ambitions felt natural. It felt like love. We had been married 6 years. No children, though we talked about it. The kind of marriage that looked solid from the outside and mostly felt solid from the inside until it didn't. The distance crept in slowly, the way it always does. Tessa had been less affectionate over the past couple of months. She stayed at the studio later than her schedule required. She showered immediately after coming home, sometimes before she'd even said hello. Her phone lived face down on every surface, and she angled the screen away whenever I passed behind her. I noticed. I always noticed. But I told myself that her career was growing, that my long shifts were draining her too, that the emotional weight of my job spilled over and pushed people away without me meaning it too. I made excuses for her because I wanted our marriage to work. 3 weeks before everything ended, I installed a new security system while Tessa was visiting her sister. A string of break-ins in our neighborhood had escalated, and I wanted exterior cameras, door sensors, and motion alerts covering the upstairs hallway and bedroom entrance. Cloud storage. Live feeds I could pull up from my phone. When Tessa came home, I explained how it all worked. She half listened, said it sounded thorough, and went to make dinner. Then on a Tuesday, while I sat completing shift paperwork, my phone buzzed with an alert. Bedroom motion detected. Tessa had told me that morning she'd be teaching until 5. I opened the live feed. She was walking into our bedroom with Leon Hastings, the husband of one of her yoga clients. A man who had shaken my hand at a charity event and praised my work while his wife smiled beside him. He was removing his shirt. I gripped the phone until my knuckles ached. I did not drive home. I did not call her name. I walked into an empty supply room, sat on the floor, and forced my breathing slow. Then I opened the cloud archive. There were 3 earlier recordings. This was not a mistake. It was a routine. I watched every recording alone, in my car, in the dark parking lot of a grocery store 3 blocks from our house. I couldn't watch them at home. I couldn't watch them anywhere Tessa might find me. The timestamps told a story more clinical than any argument could. Leon arrived within 30 minutes of my shift starting each time. He left no later than 2 hours before I was expected back. Tessa sometimes changed the bedsheets before I came home. Once she had opened the bedroom windows. The effort she had invested in maintaining this secret wasn't impulsive. It was practiced, organized. She had been protecting this lie the way I had protected our house, methodically, with care, as if it mattered. I sat with that knowledge for almost an hour before I started the car. The first call I made the next morning was not to Tessa. It was to a divorce attorney named Daniel Mercer, a quiet, methodical man whose reputation came recommended by colleagues at the station who had been through their own bad years. I explained what the cameras had captured. He told me to stop talking and start listening. Daniel's instructions were precise. Preserve the original footage, every file unchanged. Create encrypted backups and give him a separate copy. Photograph all financial documents in the house, mortgage statements, retirement accounts, vehicle titles, and tax returns for the past 3 years. Review the joint accounts for irregular spending. Do not threaten Tessa. Do not confront Leon. Do not do anything that could transform me from the wronged party into the problem. He also explained the limits of what I could expect under Washington state's divorce laws. Adultery alone wouldn't hand me every shared asset. The marriage's duration, our respective contributions, and final settlement negotiations would all factor in. But evidence of hidden spending, misuse of marital funds, or dishonesty during proceedings could meaningfully affect what I walked away with. I followed every instruction to the letter. I backed up the footage, handed a copy to Daniel, and spent 2 evenings quietly photographing documents from the shared filing cabinet. The joint accounts showed small cash withdrawals and several charges I didn't recognize, amounts too modest to trigger suspicion on their own, but impossible to dismiss once I looked at them alongside 4 afternoons that hadn't happened the way Tessa had claimed. At home, I performed the hardest role of my life. I made breakfast. I asked about her classes. I laughed at the right moments and kissed her cheek at the door and acted like a man who had no idea his world had been dismantled while he was saving someone else's. One evening, Tessa mentioned Michelle Hastings casually, Leon's wife. She described her as insecure and controlling, then said that Leon deserved someone who genuinely appreciated him. She said it with such comfortable certainty, such easy cruelty, that I had to excuse myself to refill a glass I didn't need. After she fell asleep, I found Michelle on Facebook. Her profile was full of family photographs, anniversary posts, and public praise for her devoted husband. I sent her a message that same night. I told her I needed to discuss something involving Leon and Tessa. She responded defensively at first, but when I mentioned dated video recordings, her tone shifted immediately. She agreed to meet the following afternoon. Her final message before I closed the app stopped me cold. "Is this about my husband sleeping with your wife?" she asked directly through the screen. I realized she had been carrying her own suspicion alone. But suspicion, no matter how heavy, is not the same as seeing the truth with your own eyes. What? Michelle Hastings arrived at the cafe before me and chose a corner table with her back to the wall. She was 36, with precise posture and the kind of composed expression that people develop after years of absorbing pressure without showing it. She worked in commercial property management. She was not the kind of woman who needed to be handled carefully. She asked how I had found out. I explained the security system, the notification, the archive. I placed my phone on the table and played 30 seconds of footage, enough for her to recognize her husband, not so much that I was forcing her to absorb more than she needed to see. She watched without flinching. Her jaw tightened, she did not cry. Instead, she asked me how many recordings existed, whether they carried clear timestamps, and whether my attorney had already received and preserved the originals. Her questions were immediate and practical, and they earned my respect immediately. When I confirmed there were 4 encounters, she leaned forward and asked quietly whether I would allow her attorney to use the footage in her own divorce proceedings. I agreed, I told her, provided both our legal teams coordinated carefully and that neither Tessa nor Leon learned about the evidence before we were ready. Then Michelle told me what she had been noticing on her end. Leon had recently grown secretive about their finances, she explained. He had described a consulting investment that had absorbed several $1,000s from their joint account. She had found hotel charges attributed to work conferences she couldn't verify. She had been quietly building her own record for weeks, she said, but had lacked the definitive evidence she needed, until now. I realized the affair had extended well beyond my house. We agreed not to act immediately. I wanted one final confrontation, both betrayed spouses present, both cheaters caught without any room to shape the story before we had finished speaking. Michelle agreed, but insisted firmly that every step remained deliberate. We would record the confrontation. We would contact police if anyone became violent. We would have completed divorce petitions ready before entering the house. The goal, she made clear, was not only humiliation. It was to deny Tessa and Leon any window to hide money, delete messages, or prepare competing narratives. Over the following days, we each worked separately with our attorneys. I documented our mortgage balance, retirement accounts, vehicle titles, and every financial contribution I could substantiate. Michelle worked with her own attorney to trace Leon's suspicious withdrawals, restaurants, hotel rooms, a jewelry purchase, a weekend trip he had described as a client conference. Then she told me about the bracelet. Leon had purchased Tessa an expensive bracelet using money drawn from their joint account, she said. The receipt was in a credit card statement Michelle had finally requested in full. I knew that bracelet. Tessa had worn it to our anniversary dinner. She told me she had bought it for herself on sale after a particularly good month at the studio. I had smiled across the table. ND told her it looked beautiful on her. Now I understood that the deception had never been careless or impulsive. It had been deliberate, layered, and sustained, and it had looked me directly in the eye across a candle-lit restaurant table while I paid the bill. What? Michelle had covered quickly. She told Leon she was organizing household documents for tax preparation, and he had appeared to accept the explanation, but something in his behavior had shifted. He was watching her more carefully than before. That same evening, I noticed Tessa watching me, not dramatically, just a fraction more attentive than usual, a pause before answering a question, her eyes tracking me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Leon stopped coming to the house. 4 days passed without a single motion alert, without any indication he was planning another visit. I began to wonder whether they had sensed the danger forming around them. Tessa's messages with Leon were private, and I had no legal means to access them. I was dependent on the cameras, the financial records, and whatever Michelle could observe from accounts she had legitimate access to. Daniel told me to stay patient. The divorce petition was nearly finalized, the footage was secured and preserved, and the financial documentation was thorough. He reminded me not for the first time that acting from rage could undo everything we had built. If I lost control during the confrontation, if I gave Tessa any reason to position herself as a victim of my behavior rather than the author of her own choices, a judge's sympathy could shift. My career, my freedom, and my legal standing all needed to survive this intact. I promised myself I would not throw everything away for 2 liars. Then the money became urgent. I logged into our joint savings account on a Wednesday morning and found a pending transfer of $18,000 to an account I had never seen before. The bank's automatic verification process had paused the transaction and flagged it for my confirmation. Tessa claimed it was an investment in a wellness business partnership she was developing, but she could not produce a contract, a prospectus, or even the name of a supposed business partner. I told her I would look into it. I sent the records to Daniel that afternoon. Michelle discovered that Leon had made a similar inquiry, asking their bank about withdrawing equity from their home to fund a personal investment. We both understood what was happening. They were preparing to leave, not just their marriages but their financial obligations before any divorce proceedings could protect either of us. The confrontation could no longer wait for the perfect moment. It had to happen now. On Thursday morning, I kissed Tessa goodbye, pulled on my paramedic uniform, and drove to the station. She asked if I'd be working overtime. I told her I probably would. Hours passed. Every vibration from my phone tightened something in my chest. I waited, stared at reports I couldn't read, and watched the clock move without meaning. Then, shortly after 2 in the afternoon, 2 alerts arrived in rapid succession. Front door opened. Upstairs motion detected. I opened the camera feed. I called Michelle immediately. "It's happening," I said into the phone. "I'm already in my car," she answered without a moment's hesitation. I had spent my career racing toward other people's disasters. That afternoon, I drove toward my own, and this time I wasn't coming to save anyone. I reached the house 8 minutes before Michelle and sat in my own driveway watching the front door of the home I had paid for, maintained, and trusted with everything I had. Every light I could see from outside was ordinary. The garage door was closed. The neighborhood was quiet. From the street, it could have been any other Thursday afternoon. I did not go inside until Michelle's car turned the corner. She parked behind me and stepped out without rushing. We looked at each other once, confirmed our phones were recording, and I verified that the home security system was actively uploading to cloud storage. It was. Every second was being preserved automatically, beyond anyone's ability to delete or deny. We entered through my front door. I could hear movement upstairs before we reached the landing. Leon's shoes sat at the base of the staircase beside Tessa's cardigan, folded neatly across the banister. That small, careful detail, the folded cardigan, nearly broke something inside me. She had tidied while betraying me. She had maintained her habits even here, in the middle of destroying everything we had built together. I opened the bedroom door. They were in my bed. For several seconds, the room held a silence so complete it felt almost formal. Tessa went rigid beneath the sheets, the color draining from her face the way it does from people who have just understood that the version of events they plan to tell will no longer be possible. Leon scrambled toward the edge of the mattress, reaching for anything to cover himself. Michelle stood behind my left shoulder and looked at her husband the way a person looks at something they already knew was broken, but had been hoping, quietly and privately, was not. I placed a folder on the bed between them. Printed screenshots from the cloud archive, time-stamped financial records, drafted divorce papers for both marriages, mine and Michelle's, prepared in advance and signed by our respective attorneys, ready for formal service. "Both of you are finished," I said. Tessa cried immediately, not the slow, sorrowful kind of crying that arrives when someone genuinely understands what they have done, the fast, reactive kind that arrives the moment someone realizes they have been caught without an exit. I had been emotionally unavailable, she told me through her tears. My work had created a distance between us that she hadn't known how to close, she insisted. She said it as though I had caused this. As though my long hours were the reason Leon's shoes sat at the bottom of my staircase. He and Michelle had already been unhappy long before any of this. Leon announced with defiant certainty. Their marriage had been hollow for years, and what he and Tessa had found together was something real. Then I told them both what the cameras had captured. I told them the attorneys already possessed copies of every file, every timestamp, every frame. The excuses stopped. The justifications collapsed. And then they turned on each other. Choosing my house had been reckless and stupid, Leon said, his voice rising with accusation. He had told her they should be more careful. Tessa fired back, accusing him of being the one who had pursued her, who had been the aggressor from the very beginning. Michelle laid every hotel charge, every restaurant receipt, the jewelry purchase, and the bracelet on the table with the same measured composure she had shown in the cafe. Leon's expression changed completely when he understood the full scope of what she had traced and documented. The color left his face the same way it had left Tessa's. He lunged for Michelle's phone. I stepped between them before his hand reached her. "Stay out of it," Leon warned, his voice low and tense. "Step back," I replied, holding my ground. He shoved me hard with both hands, his chest colliding with mine, and demanded the recording be deleted before anyone saw it. I warned him once. He swung. I blocked the punch and drove him backward into the wall hard enough to rattle the picture frames. He came at me again, faster and more desperate than I expected, and I hit him hard, clean, with the kind of controlled force that 11 years of physically managing chaotic emergencies had built into my hands without me ever choosing it. He went down. Every instinct I had told me to stop there. Every year of training and self-discipline told me that what I had already done was enough. But the rage in my chest was not controlled instinct. It was something older and rower than that, and I nearly lost myself to it. I hit him once more when he tried to rise, then pinned him to the floor, and I made myself hold that position and breathe until the decision to continue became a decision I was consciously refusing to make. Across the room, Tessa threw herself at Michelle's phone, clawing for it with both hands. Michelle pushed her away once, cleanly, without panic. Tessa came back harder, and the two women crashed sideways into the dresser, sending a lamp and a framed photograph to the floor. Michelle overpowered her, drove her back onto the bed, and looked down at her with an expression that contained no anger whatsoever, only clarity. "Sleeping with a client's husband," Michelle said, her voice low and steady. "And wearing a bracelet he bought with my money to your anniversary dinner was not a moment of weakness. You made that choice over and over again for weeks." Tessa had no answer for that. She could only cry. The room was in full chaos. Leon was still on the floor. Tessa was shaking. Michelle stood over the wreckage of her marriage with her phone recording everything and her composure entirely intact, and I understood in that moment that she had been stronger than any of us throughout the entire ordeal. I ordered them out. They begged for privacy to dress. They begged me to let them leave before the neighbors noticed. I allowed them robes and enough clothing to cover themselves. Nothing else. No private discussions, no unsupervised access to any room in my house, no opportunity to delete a message or pocket a document. On the front lawn, with the late afternoon sun making everything feel unbearably ordinary, Leon threatened to call the police over what he described as an unprovoked assault. I made the call myself. The officers arrived within 7 minutes. They separated all 4 of us, reviewed the recordings from both phones, and pulled the most relevant angles from the security system. Leon's initial shove, his first swing, and his lunge toward Michelle's phone were all visible and clear across multiple recording angles. Tessa's attack on Michelle was captured from 2 perspectives simultaneously. The responding officers established that I had entered my own legally registered property, that I had been physically attacked first, and that I had ceased the confrontation once Leon was no longer a threat. "No one arrested me?" Tessa asked, in front of the officers and the neighbors who had gathered quietly on their driveways to watch the spectacle unfolding on my lawn, whether she could stay in the house that night. She had nowhere to go, she said, her voice breaking. She just needed one night, she pleaded. I refused. I told her, in a voice that surprised me with its steadiness, that all future communication between us would go through my attorney. Michelle gave Leon the same instruction. The officers remained on the street until both their cars had disappeared from view. I went back inside alone. The bedroom was damaged, the bedding was ruined, the marriage was over. For the first time in weeks, I did not have to pretend that any part of any of it was fine. Tessa believed that being caught was the worst thing that could happen to her. It wasn't. Being caught lasted one afternoon. Living with the consequences lasted forever. The months that followed were not clean or cinematic. Divorce proceedings rarely are. Washington state does not punish adultery by stripping the unfaithful spouse of everything they are owed. I understood that going in, and Daniel had never promised me otherwise. What he had promised was that thorough preparation would protect me, and it did, in every way that mattered. The security footage established the affair's timeline and Tessa's pattern of deliberate deception. The attempted transfer of $18,000, combined with her complete inability to produce a single document supporting her supposed investment, destroyed her credibility at precisely the moment she needed it most. The court did not view her as a wronged woman attempting to secure her financial future. It viewed her as someone who had already begun dismantling the marriage financially before it was legally over. I purchased Tessa's share of the house and kept it. I protected the majority of my retirement savings. The long-term spousal support she requested was denied. She left the marriage with significantly less than she had anticipated, and she left responsible for a portion of her own legal costs. Michelle's case reached further. Her attorney entered every documented expenditure into the proceedings: the hotels, the restaurants, the jewelry, the bracelet, the weekend trip Leon had called a business conference. The court treated the use of marital funds to sustain and conceal an affair as exactly what it was. Michelle retained their home. Leon received a financial credit against the assets he was otherwise entitled to, leaving him in a position he had never imagined when any of this began. Neither of them suffered because Michelle or I manufactured lies or planted stories. The truth simply moved through the overlapping networks that had always surrounded both couples: Tessa's clients, Leon's professional contacts, mutual friends who had attended the same charity events and social gatherings where both marriages had been publicly performed for years. Clients learned that Tessa had slept with the husband of a woman who attended her classes, accepted gifts purchased with that woman's money, and worn those gifts to her own husband's face. Several canceled their memberships without comment, which required no comment at all. The wellness studio quietly removed Tessa from its instructor schedule within 2 months, citing a restructuring that fooled no one. Without my income and without her studio work, She moved into a cramped apartment east of Seattle and started over from a position she had created entirely by herself. She called her parents and asked whether she could come home temporarily. Her father had watched the recordings before she made the call. A single moment of poor judgment might reasonably be called a mistake, he told her with quiet firmness. Repeatedly bringing another man into her husband's house, across multiple weeks, with care and planning and deliberate concealment, required something more than a moment of weakness. He told her no. Leon's professional reputation survived the divorce. His finances and his domestic life did not. He lost the house, paid substantial legal costs, and discovered within months that the version of Tessa he had pursued so recklessly, the exciting and uncomplicated version that existed only in the context of secrecy and someone else's destruction, vanished the moment bills and daylight replaced the thrill. Their relationship collapsed without me needing to accelerate passion built entirely on someone else's ruin has no foundation once the ruin is complete. I replaced the bed, I repainted the bedroom, I returned to work. The house stopped feeling like a monument to what had happened inside it and began feeling, slowly at first, and then completely, like proof that she had failed to take it from me. Michelle and I still meet occasionally, coffee, sometimes lunch. We compare progress through the aftermath with the ease of two people who require no explanation for the things the other one already understands. What we share is not a romance. It is something quieter and more durable than that. It is the understanding of two people who looked at the worst version of their lives and refused, deliberately and without fanfare, to let it become the final version. Tessa sent me a long message several months after the divorce was finalized. It was detailed and emotional, and I believe, genuinely meant. She wanted me to know that she understood the damage she had caused and that she was working, in therapy and in solitude, to understand why she had made the choices she had. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Some betrayals deserve forgiveness from a distance. Others deserve silence,